Hello, my name is Mike. This is a bike. And I'm standing in a car where an engine should be. And that's because, well, if you followed our previous episodes, you'll know that that's because we are going to upgrade this 6-cylinder car into a 351 V8 car. To do that, we obviously have to take the old engine out, and we have to do a few things to get the wrong engine ready to go in, including changing out the K-member, which I have sitting over here, and the old one's still in it. When I ordered parts for the engine to make it work here, I ordered a flex plate. I was very pleased to see that the torque converter didn't have the ring gear on it, meaning that I could use an ordinary flex plate with the ring gear on it that typical V8s would use. So I ordered a couple of flex plates based on the research that I did, which was obviously quite flawed. I didn't know if it was a 50-ounce weight or 28-ounce weight, so I bought both of them, and I worked with the assumption that I needed 157 gear teeth. Neither of the flywheels I ordered is going to work because, well, both of the ones I ordered were 157 teeth, and the one that I need is 164 teeth. So even though it's a C5, which is essentially a C4 with a lock-up transmission, a lock-up torque converter, it turns out that the bell housing and the flex plate more closely match a C6 or an AOD. Confused yet? Yeah, so was I. Anyway, so fortunately I'm able to send these ones back and I'll get the correct one. You might ask, well, why didn't I just use this one off the 6-cylinder? Well, the one on the 6-cylinder is internally balanced, which means there are no weights on the flex plate. And on the 351, I need external balancing, so I need that 28-ounce weight. Now, could I just weld my own weight on? You've seen my welding skills, right? Nah, I don't think so. Anyway, I've got that flex plate on order, so we can't put the engine in right away, but that's okay, because it's going to take me a while to figure out how to get this K-member out of here. So, stick around.
Somewhere in a dusty, dirty back alley in western Arizona, not far from historic Route 66, is an old fart trying to cram a square peg into a round hole. He'll work on anything, just as long as it's got at least 2 cool wheels.
Now, typically, when I do a job and I use the wrong parts, I'm able to cobble things and make them work. But kind of the one exception, at least as far as my experience goes, is when it comes to engines. Every engine job I've done in the past has always been put the same engine in that you took out, or at least similar. And I'm not one of those who's done a lot of upgrades and high-performance swaps and stuff like that. Because, you know, swapping, that's kind of scary. There's a lot of details. So this is really the first time I'm upgrading or swapping an engine into this vehicle that is not the one that came out of it. And that's probably a good thing, because you see in this one, it's a little more straightforward. All I have to do is swap out the K-member, theoretically, and my engine should bolt right in. See, I don't want to have to get in there and measure and weld in tabs to the frame for the motor mounts and you know, all those cuts and welds. All that stuff scares me, because even though I'm a butcher, when it comes to an engine, last thing I need is for the engine to fall out going down the road. So anyway, I think to start with, I'm going to remove the steering system completely. It's pretty straightforward. A couple of tie rod ends, disconnect the flex coupler shaft. The hoses are already disconnected up top. I'll pull that off because it's got to get transferred to the other one. I'll disconnect the sway bar, and then I'll go after the lower ball joints. I need to disconnect the lower ball joints, and then I can swing the struts out like this, lower the control arm, take the springs out. I think that's pretty much it. Then I've got 8 bolts to take out. We'll take out. We'll find out. Now you may think that now that I've got this out and this ready to go back in, that I'm at the halfway point of my project. No, doesn't work like that. See, this would be the halfway point if all the parts that came out were the same parts going in, which they're not. So there's little differences between these two subframes beside the mount locations. For example, there's these bushings on the new one for the power steering rack, and they're different than the bushings that were on this one. These ones attached to the actual subframe. These ones were just a separate piece with a little anti-skid deal on it, and they're a slightly different diameter, which means, yeah, I can put my rack back in, but then I'm going to have too much play in the rubber bushing because these are smaller than those. And these don't come out. So I have to go with those. Also, there's a couple of holes that I need. I did have to tap out 2 holes for the shift linkage bracket. I assume the newer vehicles, like the one this K member came out of, probably had a cable instead of mechanical linkage. But those things are relatively minor. They're easily worked around. No, when I say there's more work to do on the other end than up to this point, what I'm talking about is getting that engine to operate. I've got to come up with transmission linkage, throttle linkage. I still don't have a carburetor for it. I've got to come up with a fuel system because, well, this engine needs an electric fuel pump, and the old one had a mechanical fuel pump, so I've got to rig that up. I gotta tie all the wiring in for the indicators and so forth, and for the charging system, because the charging systems are different. This one has an external regulator. This motor has an internal regulator. So there's a whole lot of little stuff to do. I also found out that the separator plate, I was going to use this separator plate, and it turns out that even though the bolt pattern here and here and the starter and all along here is the same, the top two holes are narrower on the V8 than they are on the 6-cylinder. That's going to be a problem. But I think I have a solution for that. I think we're going to actually drill into the engine block and recess them so I can put countersunk screws in to hold this to the engine block, and then bolts to the bell housing, something like that. Should be enough to hold it because the bulk of the torque will still be transferred through this. Anyway, those are the challenges that are coming up. So it's like everything else. It's just going to snowball. What I've done to try and make it a little easier for me to get up under it and get the bolt started and center properly is I got the lower ball joints in and just started the nuts on top to hold it, and then I can go up under it with a jack and lift it up, because you want to get these holes, lined up. So that should make my job a little bit easier. At least I'm hoping it will. We'll find out in a minute. Houston, we have a problem. See, I got some of the bolts started, but well, the hole doesn't quite line up. It's just slightly wider than the subframe of the car. I threw a ratchet strap across it, thinking that, if I pull on the car's existing unibody frame rails, maybe I can get them to slide just a little bit. I got both of these started over here, and I got the back ones, all four of them started. I can't get the two on the other side. Gotta figure something out. Up rigging a piece of chain, and then I could pry against the body and pull it over enough just to get that 1/16 of an inch more space I need to get the bolt started. So that worked out pretty good. What? Did you think I was going to try to jam this spring up in there with just a pry bar? You know how dangerous that is? I mean, these things will take your face off. See, I've already got one false tooth. I don't want to collect the whole series. So I went over to the local O'Reilly's and borrowed their coil spring compressor. We'll get them back in the safe way. Well, that's a little safer, I think. We'll find out. These things pop right out. But talk about a pain in the butt to get back in. I had to compress it. And then I had to keep this rubber bumper in place with tape and glue. And then I used a ratchet strap and a come along to pull that sucker the last little bit of the way into place. What a pain in the neck. Oh my goodness. But nobody died, and I still have all my teeth. So on the steering rack mounts, they're a little different setup. On the original, they use this sleeve, and it's got these like grippy surfaces so that when you tighten it down, it doesn't slide around. However, on the new one, well, they're built right in. So obviously they can't slip around. The problem becomes they're a different diameter. So these are smaller, and I'm going to have all kinds of play in my rubber bushing. The depth is the same, but the diameter is different. So I came up with a solution. I went down and got some heat shrink, and we'll put a couple of layers of heat shrink on there to take up the play until we meet this diameter. And then my bushings will slide right over it. Sounds good. Had to run to the hardware store because these are the bolts that held the steering rack on with those bushings I showed you earlier. Now I've got a small metal sleeve instead that I had to change the size of so that it would fit the rubber bushing, and I had to get some skinnier bolts. You can see the difference there. Just a lot of little stuff. This is why I said, you know, when you think it's the halfway point, you know, you're about 1/8 of the way there. Anyway, get that steering rack run down. And then we'll put the rotors back on, put a little fresh grease in them. That's something I haven't done to this car since I've had it. Had it a year, haven't even put any fresh grease in it. Bearings look good though. Nothing was damaged there. And then the whole front suspension part of the job will be complete. And then all we have to do is wait for that flex plate to arrive for the motor. And then the most funnest part, putting the new motor in. Yay! Now, when I go to put grease in my bearings, I've got one of these fancy schmancy wheel bearing grease injector tools. It works really good. You just put the bearings in there and you push it down and it squishes it right up alongside the rollers inside the cage. So you don't have to put a big glob in your palm of your hand and do it that way. I mean, I've done it both ways. This works really good. And the nice thing is, if I put the inner bearing and the outer bearing together, when I push this down, it's going to grease both bearings at the same time. Makes it pretty convenient. Also, when you use this tool, I heard this from another YouTuber, it's very, very important that as you're pushing it down, that grease is oozing through, you got to make the smoosh sound. You got to go whoosh. If you don't go whoosh, it won't get enough grease in the rollers. Anyway, that's my plan and I'm sticking to it. Oh yeah, they're packed. And if you look at them, you can see how they just oozed all up alongside those rollers. I still got to apply a little bit on the outside edge, but at least it's well impregnated into the roller cage. So that's good. And I got a couple of loose seals, so this car will roll a lot easier. That big old V8 ain't going to feel these bearings at all. In theory. Slime. Round one, here's round two for the other side. Come here, bearing, work with me. Get in the middle of it. And fire two. Ah, yeah. Oozed right in there. Excellent. I love the smell of grease in the morning. Reminds me of working on cars and stuff. That's what it reminds me of. It's afternoon though. Oh well. Once I get these rotors on, I get my brake calipers back on, we are officially done with the subframe K-member swap out. Only a few minor changes. The steering rack bolts and bushings are different. Had to tap a couple of holes. The anti-sway bar links were in a slightly different location, but they still connected. So once we get our flex plate, maybe we can look at you know, putting a motor in this thing. that's going to do it for this episode, guys. I've gone as far as I can. At least we got the K-member put in place, all the suspension and steering components back in, ready to go. All I need now is a flex plate, and I got to make some kind of an adapter gizmo to go between those top two bolts and the transmission bell housing. Got a couple ideas for that, and we'll address those in the next video. Once again, thanks for watching. Please hit the subscribe button, tell your friends about our channel, tell your enemies about our channel. That's even better. Either way, thanks for watching. Uh-oh. Houston, we have a problem. You guys see it? Yeah, I'm towed way in at the front. That's because the guy warned me about this. My new K-member is a little bit wider, so the ball joints are a little further out, which causes my wheels to turn in. I'm going to have to do a little tie rod adjusting here.